Hi, well, welcome to the Brian and Pete podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined with my friend Nancy Goudie. So welcome, Nancy. Thanks for joining us on the Brian and Pete podcast.
Thank you, Pete. It's lovely to be here.
And we're going to go on a journey just really digging into what the Lord has done. You have an incredible testimony, not just a testimony. Your life is a testimony, but the collection of testimonies all the way through every stage of your life, Nancy. And I've heard bits of it, and it is really blessed me. And what I thought would be wonderful is to bring you into this podcast so that people can hear about what God can do through someone and in someone and the ups and downs of life. So Nancy, thank you so much for joining us. So grateful. So Nancy, why don't you start just by introducing yourself and where are you and where are you from and where are you now?
Very important.
And the real part, and tell us about your life.
Yeah, I mean, I am Scottish, possibly still tell by the accent, but I've lived in England for 45 years. My husband and I met each other in Ayrshire, where he was born in Prestwick and I was born in Ayr. And God called us so clearly into full-time Christian work that if you hadn't gone, it would have been sheer disobedience. And we embarked on this journey, which has been, as you said, absolutely amazing. I've written a book called Who Would Ever Have Thought? And basically I entitled it like that because I thought, you know, who would ever have thought that God could use two simple young people from Ayr in Scotland and use them in such an amazing way across, well, right across the UK and in the world as well.
And Nancy, so you mentioned you've written a book, but actually just before we went live, you've written 20 books and you're about to launch 3 more. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
That's incredible.
I absolutely love writing. I love the creativity of it. But when I first started writing, well, it was Ray, my husband, who said to me, Nancy, I think you've got a book in you. And I was going, no way, Ray, no way. I cannot write a book. And he said, no, I really do think you've got something that would be really beneficial to the church. And I was like, no. If you asked my English teacher, she would tell you that it's no. You know? So I remember going to, because we were in a band and we had records that came out and albums, etc. And we went to see the guys that produced them. And they were record publishers, but also I'd forgotten they were actually book publishers as well. And while Ray and I are talking about our next album, suddenly at the end of the conversation, Ray says, oh, by the way, Nancy's got a book in her. I think you should publish her book. And I'm like,
thanks.
What? And I'm throwing daggers at him through my eyes, you know. And he said, Nancy, tell them what about the book. And I'm like, oh, Ray. But then I just told them about the idea that was actually happening in practical. Because lots of people came to me for advice and for wisdom and to ask me to pray for them. Mm-hmm. And while I went away and I fasted, I prayed, I sought God, and I gave them at the end the answers. What was happening to them was they went away happy that I was going to pray and watch television. I thought, this isn't right. So I said to them, look, would you be prepared to pray and fast and seek God about this? And they said, yes, they wouldn't. They said, but we don't know how to reach God like you do. So I said, okay, well, I'll teach you. So I produced a plan for them to go through every day and to work through. And at the end of it, they had a journal full of notes from God. And they came back to me and used to say to me, Nancy, it's amazing. God's spoken to me. And I'm like, great. So that was the book.
So then you could watch television because they're,
yes.
they're doing the work.
No.
That's amazing. So that was your first book?
That was my first book. And it's been my bestseller, to be honest.
Isn't that great? What's the name of that book, Nancy?
Well, it's now in its current form. It's Spiritual Health Encounters.
Very good.
And it's basically teaching people the whole spiritual exercises that we can do, and showing them from scripture that it very biblical, and also then going into different plans, like diet plans, I guess, except in the Bible. And that has been incredibly fruitful over the years. In fact, ministers use it for anyone that comes to them asking them to pray. Here, take this. And of course, it's all in different subjects.
Great.
And you can tap into whatever subject you're wanting prayer for.
Spiritual health encounters.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, all right. Well, okay, Nancy, now we've jumped ahead, I realise. So let's go back to when you were 6 years old.
Yes.
You're born in Ayrshire.
I was.
What happens when you were 6?
Yeah. I went to a Christian Brethren church, and every Sunday evening we would have hellfire preaching. You know what I mean by that, don't you? If you walk out of this building and you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell. And so I got that every Sunday. But my mum and dad taught me about the love of God and how God loved me and wanted to get to know me. And so every night I used to pray kneeling beside my bed. My mum and dad would say a sentence and I would just repeat it. And that was my prayers. And I said to my mum and dad, I would like to become a Christian. And my dad looked at his 6-year-old daughter and thought, does she really know what she's going to do? You know, because it's an important decision. He said, why don't you wait till you're a little bit older? And I just accepted that. But obviously God thought differently because of what happened just a little bit after that. Maybe a couple of weeks after, my mum was at church with 2 friends. My father was putting my little brother to bed. And I was downstairs in the lounge, not thinking about anything like Christianity or church or anything. All of a sudden, something happened. It was supernatural. I lost the power to stand. I fell forward onto my knees. And the way I fell in front of my couch. And so I was pushing against the couch to try and get back up on my feet. I didn't understand what had gone on. You know, I wasn't frightened at all, but I was just bewildered. And I pushed against the couch and tried to get back on my feet, but couldn't. And so I was exhausted trying. So as a little girl of 6, I just lay my head down on the couch and said to myself, I'll have a little rest and then I'll try again. And that's what I did. And then I went to raise my head from the couch and I couldn't raise my head from it. It was as if there was a huge hand over the back of my head and a huge hand over the back of my legs. And suddenly, well, actually, I heard a voice say, Nancy. And immediately I knew it was God. And because this is the way I prayed every night, you know, kneeling before my bed. And here I was kneeling before this couch and I couldn't get up. And I was like, God wants me to become a Christian, but I don't know how to become a Christian. So I said my first ever real prayer, which was this: Dear God, I'll tell my daddy. And immediately the pressure lifted from my neck and from my legs. I stood up, and at that second my father came into the room and I excitedly told him what had happened. He said, come on, I'll tell you how to become a Christian. Hey. Oh my goodness, Pete, the joy that came into my life. I was only 6, you know what I mean? But I knew something had happened deep within me. I was filled with joy. And also an eagerness to tell anyone about the God I had encountered. And that's lasted throughout the whole of my life. I just love telling people a God who loves them and cares for them. I'll tell you a bit of a funny story, but I said my mum was out at church with 2 people. One, it was a couple, and the woman was a Christian, the man wasn't. And when they came in after church, I was shouting on my mum, Mummy, come up here quick, because I wanted to tell her what had happened. And she comes bounding up the stairs, thinking there was a fire or something, with this couple, and came into my bedroom, and I was bouncing on the bed. I was so full of joy. And I said, oh, Mummy, I've become a Christian. I said, and I'm so happy about it, and the bed's even happy, as I said, thinking it was the bed it was bouncing rather than me. And then I immediately turned to Hugh, who was the husband, and I said, Hugh, that's my mummy and daddy Christians. My two big brothers are Christians, and Dawn's a Christian. Wouldn't you like to give your life to Jesus? And unknown to me, because I was too busy bouncing, but tears came in his eyes and he walked out of the room. And I thought, right, he's going to be my first prayer target. So I had a plan to help the Holy Spirit. So every Sunday night that Hugh came, I would make sure I sat next to him. And every time the preacher said, if you walk out of this building and you don't know Jesus, you're going to hell, I would make sure that Hugh knew the preacher was talking to him by doing this. In the ribs.
Nudging him. For those listening in podcast, Nancy's elbowing the air.
Yes, I was elbowing him in his ribs. And he lasted 2 weeks and gave his life to Jesus.
What chance did he have? Between the preacher and the 6-year-old.
Yes. And when it came to my house, well, first of all, it was my little brother, who was only 3. And I used to share a room with him. And so every night I would preach to him. And of course, the only preaching I knew was hellfire preaching. Mummy and daddy are saved, and your two big brothers are saved, and I'm saved, and you're going to hell.
How many hellfire preachers do you see bouncing on a bed, though? Come on, seriously.
That's true. It's true.
That's so good, Nancy. That's amazing. Wow. So 6 years old, and then you're on fire for Jesus. Sorry, just to say, Nancy, as you were telling me this, I was thinking this weekend we had 3 people decide to follow Jesus in our services. So we had in one of our communities, this Italian lady gave her life to the Lord. In one of our morning services, a guy who'd phoned up through the week who was asking, saying, "I'm 18, I've got a Bible, I'd like to come to church." Brilliant. He gave his life to Christ. And then Sunday night, a guy, my daughter was on one of the gatherings, welcoming people, and she could see this guy walking past the building, and then walking past again, and then
really?
And then he just, my daughter waved him. He eventually came in, and he gave his life to the Lord. And I just think about that joy of, and it doesn't get less.
No, it doesn't.
Just see the joy of seeing people, coming to know the Lord. What an absolute joy! What a joy! Years have passed, but thank God. Okay, Nancy. So in your teenage years, you and Ray met as teenagers, is that right? And then did you start a band at that point? How did you guys meet, and then what?
Well, we were in a band in Scotland, but not. It was one that Ray, my husband, and his brother Derek started. It was called Unity. Mm-hmm. We actually, believe it or not, we actually had our own program on STV where it was called Unity Sings. And we were kind of like a choir with an orchestra and a band and kind of ABBA style music.
Great.
And so, we travelled all over the UK. We produced albums, and we did events and concerts everywhere.
And that's as Unity.
As Unity.
Okay, great.
And it was. I met Ray when I was 16. We got engaged at 18 and married at 20.
Brilliant.
That was my age. He was slightly older. And then about 4 or 5 years later, God called us into full-time work. And it was when we first went into full-time work, we didn't really know how God was going to work through us, but we felt we should start a band. And part of the work of this band would be to the church and encouraging them for revival, etc. And part of our work would be to the mainstream, where we go into schools, colleges, universities, and tell people about our lives. Couldn't preach in schools, but we could invite them to come to an event at the weekend where there was music, stories, and a preach at the end. And oh my goodness, we saw
And that band was called
That
Heartbeat.
band was called Heartbeat, yes.
And tell us,
We did come to Scotland a few times.
so tell us about the journey of Heartbeat then.
Oh my goodness, it was incredible. Um, to begin with, we could hardly get two people to come and listen to our music. But by the end, we filled a hall which was like 2,500 people at our farewell concert, if you like. And most of those people had given their lives to Jesus through the work of Heartbeat.
Wow.
We saw people, we really did see revival. We didn't understand that that's what we were seeing. We thought we were seeing something very normal, natural, but no, we were seeing something incredibly supernatural. And it was years later that we suddenly realized, oh, that wasn't normal then. Like we would go to various schools, etc. We would invite them to come along on a Friday night or a Saturday night. The local church would work with us. They would put this event on. They usually held it in a 600 seated theatre. And I remember the one in Birmingham. This is a funny story, but in Birmingham, we were working with this church, and they knew that lots of people became Christians through the work that we did. So they were looking for maybe 100 people to give their lives to Christ. And we always asked the church, when you put in schools or colleges or universities into our program, can you make sure we have a third of our day so that we can pray in that third? We felt prayer was just so important. And before we started Heartbeat, we went to an older gentleman who, you might know him actually, a guy, I think he's in glory now, but his name was Alex Buchanan. And we said to him, we'd like to start a band. And this is why we want to start it. But would you give us advice, wisdom? And he said, well, don't start it unless you're willing to put prayer as a priority. And that's what we did. We put prayer as a priority, and oh my goodness.
So whatever the schedule, you try to carve out a third of
the day
to
pray. And that's where God gave us a strategy. That's where he told us some of the things that happened in the schools. If we were coming against barriers, God would reveal what those barriers were. Wow. And as we did spiritual warfare, the barriers went down. It was incredible. Anyway, we were praying about Birmingham and asking God, because we didn't sell tickets. We just gave out a ticket and said, come along. And we always said to them, don't come just to watch Heartbeat play. Come to see God's power in action. And we didn't know how many would come. So we prayed and prayed and prayed, God, bring the people into this big hall. And what happened was just phenomenal, because the 600 seated theatre was absolutely crammed full. So much so we had to ask the Christians to leave.
Wow.
And that happened often through our concerts, where we had to ask the Christians to leave. Anyway, we did our concert, we told our stories, we shared our music, and Ray came on at the end, and he only spoke for about 10 minutes, and he would just share gospel message. If you want to give your life to Christ, you put your hand up or stand up or whatever it was. And this night it was, you stand up if you want to give your life to Jesus. The whole place, honestly, I could not believe it. The whole place stood.
Wow.
So there's a video of this, and you can see me in the video coming on stage and going up beside Ray and saying, Ray, they haven't understood you. The whole place is standing, you haven't understood you. And he goes, okay. So he got him to sit down. He said, now listen, this is what it means to become a Christian. It means turning your back on the things you've done wrong and saying to God, God, you are boss of my life. I'll do whatever you tell me to do, God. And I'll go wherever you tell me to go. Being a Christian is something that is important to do, but only stand if you seriously want to give your life to Christ. We all stood again. And I come up in this video, I'm coming back up to Ray and I'm saying, they don't understand you. And there was, the reason why I said that was up in the balcony, there was a couple who were, I would have said, in their 60s or 70s. So they were older, and they were the only older couple in the place. And we'd already asked the Christians to leave. So we were like, who is this couple? You know, they must be Christians. And they were standing at the appeal. So Ray then got angry with not with me, fortunately, but with the audience, going, listen, God is not mocked. If you're just standing because your friend's standing, then don't do that, you know, and all this kind of thing. And then he said, right, now, only those who want to give their lives to Christ stand. They all stood again.
Oh, wow.
It was a whole 600
Wow.
gave their lives to Jesus that night.
Wow.
And the minister went to the guy who was organising it, who was expecting 100 to come to know Jesus. And the minister said, how many journeys into life have you got? You know, that little pamphlet book.
Yeah.
How many? And he goes, well, I brought 100. He said, 100? That's not enough. We need more. But it was a great problem to have. Wow. And that couple were not Christians.
Mm-hmm. They
stood to give their lives to Christ. They had only heard the music and decided to come in at the last minute.
Wow.
So, yeah, we saw things like that happen over and over and over again. And as I say, we thought that was normal. But then we realised that actually wasn't happening in other places. And,
That's
it was just like pockets of revival.
You saw this as you travelled. You would work in schools, you'd invite them to a weekend concert, and you saw this sort of response time after time after time.
Yeah, absolutely. We went to, I think it was Northampton, and about 100 people became Christians at that event. But I want to tell you about 10 of them who all came from the one school. They get so far. I mean, these are people who don't know anything about God, anything about Christianity. They're not being brought up in a Christian home. They went back into their school and they were so excited at what God had done in their lives that they wanted to tell their friends. So they thought, how can we do this? So they knew a Christian teacher, so they spoke to her. And with the help of the Christian teacher, they decided they would go ahead and set up a Christian union, which they did. And they put prayer as a priority. And what they did was every time at lunchtime they would meet and they would pray for their school. And then they discovered that wasn't long enough. So then they started to pray before school happened. And then they thought that's not long enough either. So they prayed after school. So they were praying 3 times a day for their school. Oh, my word. What happened was incredible. There was only the 10 of them when the Christian Union started. A year later, there was 200 people in that Christian Union.
Wow.
And I gave that story at the NEC. I think it was a Reinhard Bonka meeting or something like that, where they had asked us to give some stories, and I gave that story out. And this girl and a man came up to me afterwards and said, just want to say I was one of the 10, said the girl. And the boy said, and I was one of the 200. I gave my life through them.
Wow.
It was brilliant.
So 10 people who came to Christ in one of your concerts.
Yeah.
Took that to their school, start praying.
Yeah.
And then, do you know, Nancy, when I was at school, I became a Christian when I was 15. And a few of us started meeting in our lunch break to pray for the school.
Great.
So we got permission to use one of the classrooms. And we would meet to pray every lunchtime, to pray for the school, to pray for our friends, to pray for and it resulted in us doing a mission week. Where I had a couple of bands come in and I had people share testimony, and a lot of people came to faith. But again, it's interesting, isn't it? Prayer, you know, it's not rocket science, is it? It's just you ask God to do what God wants to do, and you do it with consistency, and then you have the courage to speak up. And obviously, the results aren't just as dramatic as that, but same principle.
Absolutely, I remember. When, oh my goodness, going forward quite a few years now to about 2003, the Lord said to Ray, I want you to come up close and personal with me because there's something I want to share. Well, he thought it was vision. He got a pad, he got a pen, he came through to his prayer room and he sat there and he said, "Okay, Lord, I'm here." And what he discovered was that God just wanted to tell him that he loved him, and he had always had a problem with knowing that God really loved him. And he used to say to me, "How do you know, Nancy?" And I was like, "Well, you just know." As you get closer to God and read his word and believe what his word says. And that day, he just was soaked in God. And so every day, well, we were already getting up at 6 a.m, but he got up even earlier and just spent quality time with God. And I saw the change happening in my husband. We went on holiday to Minorca. And I thought to myself, "Oh, I'm going to, if it's changing my husband so much, I'm going to get up in the morning early." We got ready, as I say, I already was getting up at 6, but I thought, when I'm on holiday, I'm going to get up even earlier. And that's what I did. And I went and I sat by the pool. It was dark almost, and there was nobody there apart from the pool attendant and me. He was cleaning the chairs, and I was sitting on one of them with my Bible. And he was cleaning the pool. And I sat there for 2 hours before I went back to get my breakfast with the rest of the people who were in the apartment with us. And I used to go back every day and say, "It's just not long enough." God was just doing so much in me. And I was like, "Oh, I just want more time with you, Lord." And so when we came back to NGM, as we were called then, well, we still are called now. But
NGM. So tell people
NGM.
what that stands for.
Well, basically, it used to stand for New Generation Ministries, and then we changed it to New Generation Music, and now it's just NGM. So it was basically Heartbeat grew so much that we had to change the name from Heartbeat, the band, to NGM, the ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And Heartbeat had finished by this time, and we were training other bands and musicians and artists on what to do, what Heartbeat did. So we came back to NGM and we thought, we've got to share this with the rest of the people there. So we had a church meeting on a Tuesday night, and Ray told his story, and then I got up and I told what had happened to me when I followed what Ray was doing. And then we kind of thought, what do we do now? So Ray said, "Well, there's a microphone here. If you want to come and use it, do come and use it." Oh my goodness, there was about 120 of us in NGM at the time. Peak revival broke out. It was incredible. Ray and I sat there watching God move. It was as if, you physically felt this. It was as if God walked into the building.
Wow.
It was incredible. And things you had read about in revival books was happening in front of our eyes. People kept coming to the microphone saying, "God, whatever you're doing with Ray and Nancy, I want it. I'm so hungry for you. God, do what you've done in them, in me." And then others were like confessing. We never mentioned confessing sin, but they were confessing sin on the floor, on their faces before God. And this isn't one word of a lie. With all the tears that were, coming down their faces while they were lying on the floor, afterwards, there was puddles. Seriously, this is amazing. Puddles of tears all over our Cadman floor.
Wow.
And God was just doing something just incredible with us. And that lasted for about 3 and a bit years, where we just lived in that. And our prayer was, "God, we don't want just a visitation. We want a habitation. We want you to come and live with us,
Wow.
I remember one of our team, because we lived next door to Tesco, and we were often in Tesco, and there's a little gate that people can come through that goes into our garden. And they saw this girl in Tesco. She was working there. And they said to her, "Oh, you should come to our church meetings on a Tuesday." and basically just told her about what God was doing, which was really supernatural. And she decided to come. So she came through this gate, and she said it was like walking from the wardrobe into Narnia. Suddenly there was this amazing place where we had a mission and arts we still do have a mission and arts complex, where we've got recording studios, and we've got, various bands were rehearsing in all the band rehearsal rooms. And I mean, it's a performance venue, all sorts of things. And so she came in, and she was like, "Oh, what is this place?" And it wasn't just, the place was different. There was a spirit about it that she felt. She said, God's here. And she wasn't a Christian. She came in, she gave her life to Jesus, she left her Tesco job and came to work for us. Wow. And we didn't pay salaries. Wow. She had to live by faith like everybody else in NGM. And that's the kind of thing that happened over the years, and it was just wonderful.
And Nancy, going back to NGM, the heart behind it, the heart that you just touched on it a moment ago, because you had been doing Heartbeat. Yeah. You were doing the stuff, you were doing the work, you were going around schools, you were seeing people coming to faith. Yeah. And then Next Generation Ministries, Next Generation Music came about. Yeah. And you mentioned you started then training others to do Heartbeat. Yes. And I think that's such a powerful, just that phrase is so powerful. So you've been doing the ministry, and now you're releasing others to do the ministry. Yeah. So how did that change happen, and what's been the impact of NGM?
Oh, huge. Our work was that we took people for a year or 2 years or even 3 years and trained them up in their art form, but also trained them in evangelism and discipleship. And so when they left NGM to go either, well, it was 2 ways. They could go into the church as a minister, pastor, or as a youth worker or a worship leader, or they could go the other side, which was going into the mainstream. So some of our artists went into the music industry, went into, musical theatre, so ended up in the West End, or, media into television, etc. And Clubland, that was the other one we did, DJs. Wow. Who went into the clubs and saw incredible things happening there. And so we trained them up as much as we could and sent them out. And masses of them are still out there today, seeing God move, not in the way that Heartbeat did, because we saw hundreds at a time, but seeing them bit by bit being salt and light in an industry that just doesn't know Jesus. So yeah, that has been incredible, and I'm still training people today, not in music, but I've got a girl who works very closely with me. She came for a year as a dancer, and 26 or 27 years later, she's still there. She's now the general manager of the whole ministry, but also I'm training her up in how to preach, how to take a seminar, how to go do a podcast, how to be interviewed on television, etc. And that's incredible, because I don't want the work to just finish when I'm gone to glory. I want the work to continue into the future. And she's one of them that will definitely take the work into the future. So it's exciting.
So what's that phrase? It's not a Bible phrase, but they say, teach a man, give a man a fish, you can feed him for a day. Teach him to fish, and you can feed him for a lifetime. And
absolutely.
In fact, let's use a Bible one. Ephesians 4, verse 11, for the equipping of the saints to the work of ministry. Yes. So you haven't just done the ministry, and you did, boy, oh boy, you and Ray, incredibly. But now the emphasis has been on releasing others to do it. Yes. Do you have any idea how many people you've trained up through NGM through the years?
It's thousands. I mean, I have no idea how many. Funnily enough, somebody called us New Generation Marriages NGM. Because what the young people used to do was they used to come, and we always worked with a ban. They weren't allowed to, start a new relationship in their first year. We wanted them focused on Jesus. And But inevitably, people got friendships, etc. And so many people found their life partner
Oh.
through NGM. So Ray and I just decided we would count the ones that we could remember. I think we got to about 44
Oh, wow.
before we couldn't remember anymore. But
That's
there must
amazing.
have been so many that were met through NGM.
Wow.
In fact, my son met his wife at NGM. She's still working for us as a tutor and an author as well. And she's a brilliant singer-songwriter. And he met her at NGM, yes.
Wow. So a 6-year-old, that seed went down deep in the soil
Yeah.
and it produced not 30, not 60, but 100-fold what was
Well,
sown.
I'm grateful to God. I really am.
Hallelujah. Isn't that great?
Little Nancy Goudie.
Bouncing in the bed.
Yes.
So, Nancy, then there's the spiritual health retreats. So they started, when did they start? And tell people about them.
They started in 1997. In 1996, I was over in America and I was just spending time with God as I usually did in the mornings. And I felt God say to me, when you go back home, I want you to start a women's event. And I was like, Lord, you've got the wrong woman. I don't like women's events. Because in those days, there wasn't anything like there is now for women. In those days, it was kind of second rate. And, you know, I didn't want to go and wash my own dishes at a conference or make my own bed or whatever it happened to be. I wanted, if I was going to do something, I wanted it to be held in a 4-star luxury hotel. I wanted to enjoy the swimming pool, the jacuzzi, the steam, as well as having dynamic teaching, practical for the women who are coming, and also worship that just takes you into heaven. So I remember I saying to Lord, you've got the wrong one. And he said, no, Nancy, what I want you to think about is if you had a clean sheet of paper, what would you put down on that paper if you could do anything at your own, conference for women? Oh no, I got excited. So I started putting down all these things about, in a 4-star luxury hotel and blah, 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 blah. And I would have this, I would have that, next thing, prayer room, all sorts of things. And a banquet where, our NGM artist would perform after the meal. So I had all these ideas, and God said, go and do it. And so I did. I came back from America and I went to visit. Actually, it was a Scottish chain hotel. It was in Bristol at the time. And I went as a Scotswoman. I said, listen, I want a good deal. Most of the women I will contact and will come to my conference will never have set foot on your hotel. So I want you to give me a really good deal so that these women will come. And they did. And then I thought, well, how do I advertise this? So I didn't know what to do. So I just sent out an email to all the people who were on our mailing list, which wasn't many, and just prayed. And within, I think, a couple of months, it was completely sold out. It was only 60 people. But from that one conference, it has grown hugely. There's now about 600 people come to the actual main conference. And then I've got UK retreats that people come to. I've got spiritual health days that people come to. And what I said to the Lord was, would you do with my weekends what you did with Heartbeat in the 80s? I want to see in the 90s and going on, I want to see the same thing. People getting saved, people getting healed, people seeing that God is miraculous and supernatural. And he has. I have to say, it's nothing to do with me. It really is all him. But he told me a couple of years ago, Nancy, you're going to see miracles. Oh, Pete, the miracles we've seen are incredible. I mean, one lady was going to have to go on dialysis because her kidneys were failing. And she came forward for prayer. God gave her 2 brand new kidneys. Her doctor was totally amazed and said, I don't know what has happened to you, but you do not need to go on dialysis. It's as
Hallelujah.
if you've got 2 new kidneys. Another lady who had a shattered spine, she didn't come forward for prayer for that. She came forward for something else. But in the meantime, God healed her spine. She could hardly walk, and she was like, I'm healed, I'm healed. And
Praise the
she was
Lord.
able to walk, and just incredible. One lady who was at one of my spiritual health weekends, she was in a wheelchair, and she also, if she got out of the wheelchair, she would use 2 crutches, but really couldn't move other than anybody helping her to get onto those crutches. Anyway, she got prayed for. She got up from her wheelchair and she danced up and down the aisles, completely free. And everybody's cheering, and it was just amazing.
Praise
And
God.
a year later, when we went back to that hotel, she was there and she said, Nancy, I'm still healed.
Still dancing.
It was brilliant, just brilliant. So,
And that's what I love that. And one of the things I also love about what you do with these retreats is you make places deliberately available
yes,
for people who could not afford it or even
yes,
imagine going to such a thing. Tell
yeah,
people a little bit more about that, because I just think
yeah.
that's the heart of God in such a powerful way.
Yeah, again, it was the heart of God, because he said to me, whispered in my ear one day, and then it was confirmed by one of our intercessors who phoned me up and said, I feel God saying this to you. And it was go into the highways and the byways and compel them to come in. And I was like, how do I do that, Lord? So I felt we should pay for a few people who normally would come to the weekends but just couldn't because they'd gone through hard times. They didn't have any money, etc. So we weren't on salaries. So we were like, okay, well, let's give ourselves. And so that's what we did. We gave enough to give. I think it was a couple of places away. And we phoned them up and they were crying, going, I've just prayed for this morning. And I knew I couldn't come this year to the spiritual health weekend, but this is such an answer to prayer for me. And then we felt, we'd love to see people who wouldn't come to the weekends because either of money or because of their situation. A lot of people who come now have been abused, badly abused, and had never been darkened the door of a church or a Christian event. And so I wanted that type of person to come. So what we did was we partnered with people who work with homeless, people who work with prostitutes, people who work in poverty, Christians Against Poverty. And what we do was we ask the leaders to highlight some people that they think are on the journey to becoming Christians, but would need a time away to really seek him and know him. And so we have now about 130, 140 people. Every time I put on the Christian health, spiritual health weekend, they come, and they come for either completely free or for just a very small amount of money. And do you know something? When I give the appeal for people to become Christians, they are the first to the front.
First to the front.
It was the last one we held in 2024. I'm just coming up to the one that's going to happen soon, which is in January 2026. And when I gave the appeal at that, I just felt from God, go for it. So normally what happens is I kind of take them through a journey, and then at some point in the weekend, I will say, if you want to give your life to Christ, come. I just thought, no, I'm just going to do it in the very first night. So I gave an appeal in the first night for people to become Christians. 21 people gave their life to Christ that night. And that was the start of such an amazing weekend where people were getting saved, healed, set free. It just incredible. And I love it that it's the poor that, it's so the gospel, isn't it? they welcome it.
And I remember you
Because
saying, Nancy, that you wouldn't know in
no,
the 600 people who that you wouldn't
no,
know who got the
they
free
were.
places and who
No,
didn't, because there's
no, I
no.
never highlight the
Yeah.
fact that, well, individually, that they are there on a free place.
Mhm.
In fact, we go the opposite. We bless them,
Mhm.
and we know they can't buy books, so we give them books. You know, I mean, that type of thing. And so they're so knocked away by the generosity and just the warmth that they, which I always say is a reflection of Jesus. You know, what you see in us is a reflection of him, and he loves you so much. So it's been incredible. I'll tell you this one story of a woman who came on a bursary place, and she came up to me afterwards and she said to me, Nancy, I want to tell you my story. She said, I lived with a man for years who was very controlling and very violent. And she said, I used to think one day he's going to be the end of me, you know. And he wouldn't allow her to have her bank account or anything like that. So one day he walked into the house and he brought out a gun and he held it to her head like this. And she thought, this is it. This is what I felt would happen, you know, and her life is kind of flashing before her eyes. And at the last minute, he took the gun away from her head and put it to his own head and blew his brains out in front of her. Now, you can imagine the trauma that woman was going through.
Oh, yeah.
And it only happened just a few weeks before my spiritual health weekend. And she said, I couldn't go to bed at night and sleep. She said, I hardly get any sleep because, you know, I'm traumatized. And she said, I used to leave the light on and even have fairy lights up in my bedroom just to have some light. She said, because I was terrified of the stuff that would come back into my mind about how I saw him die, etc. And she said, but Nancy, this weekend I gave my life to Christ and I slept 8 hours
Yeah.
without any light on.
Praise the Lord.
Oh, do you know, that is God.
That's
It
God.
really is.
Yeah.
There's nothing I could do to make that happen.
Yeah.
But God's doing these kind of miracles, which are incredible.
Wow. Nancy, that's beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for blessing the world, Nancy, and continuing to bless the world and for caring for the vulnerable and the poor. It's the heart of God. Well done.
Yes, it is.
Nancy, tell us, dear Ray, he passed away. So that's obviously a very tough season in your life. Do you mind telling us a little bit around when you came to that moment of bereavement yourself?
Yeah, we saw people healed of all sorts of things throughout the years in churches, but also mainly in the unchurched. And they were ready for a miracle and they got them often. So when Ray got ill, it was kind of gut stuff, you know, he thought it was maybe IBS or something like that. And eventually he was told he had pancreatic cancer, which, as you probably are aware, is one of the worst cancers you can actually get. And he was taken into hospital. And thus began a prayer warrior life for me and for everyone in NGM. We were praying for him and seeking God and following God's instructions. And friends of mine who are people who have a ministry in raising people from the dead, so that kind of people, would say, God has said Ray is going to live and not die. And so we were believing for healing. He went through a 12-hour operation and survived it and got out the other side. And the oncologist said to him, you need chemotherapy, but you're not going to be well enough to get it. And Ray said, well, if God wants me to have chemotherapy, I will be well enough to get it. He said, well, you have to be a certain weight and you'll never reach that. He had lost a lot of weight. And he did. He reached the weight. He went through the chemotherapy for 6 months. The oncologist said to him, well, yes, you might be the weight now, but when you go on to it, you will lose weight and therefore you'll probably have to stop your treatment. And Ray again said, well, if God wants me to go through the whole treatment, it will happen. And you know something? Every time he had chemotherapy, he gained weight the whole way through the 6 months. Unheard of. And then at the end of that, he got a scan and he was told he was cancer-free. He had gone through 6 weeks of radiotherapy. And God said to him, you'll sail through it. And he did. He even wrote worship songs in the middle of his radiotherapy. In his head, he was like composing this song. And amazing things. So we saw miracle upon miracle upon miracle on the journey. But we didn't see the miracle that we wanted to see, which was him raised completely free from it. Because we were told by the hospital, go on holiday. You both deserve a holiday, so go on holiday. We went to Spain. We went for a month and loved it. But I could see at the end of the holiday, he was beginning to, I don't know, just kind of show signs that he all was not well. When we went back home, we had to go to the hospital to get the scan results. And when we got there, we were told that he had 2 days to live. Oh, Pete, it was such a shock. And we had to phone my son from America, who lives in America, and say to him, come home. Well, he lived for a lot longer than that. Give him 2 days, but God kept him alive for over 2 months. And he was eventually told in hospital, you need to go home, you're too well to be in here. And so he came home, and he gradually, bit by bit, came off the drugs that he was on. He had a thing in his arm that fed him the drugs whenever he needed it. And eventually he was only on 5 mils of morphine, which the nurse was coming to take out of his arm that particular day. And he obviously could see in my expression that I was worried. And he leaned over the bed and grabbed a hold of me and said, Nancy, don't worry about me. He said, I'm absolutely fine, love. He said, I'm fine. He said, and we've just got to trust God. He was in bed sleeping that day. The nurse came to take the driver out, and he said, do you mind doing it tomorrow? He said, I'm a bit tired today. So she said, no, that's fine, absolutely fine. So she went away, and at 7 o'clock, one of my friends dropped off a meal for me. Now, Ray wasn't really eating at that point very much, so it was just me that had to have a meal. So I went downstairs, looked at Ray before I left. He was still sleeping. And so I went downstairs, had my meal. 10 minutes later, came back up into the room, and he's gone. And I did everything that we're taught to do. Rebuke the spirit of death, command the life to come back into him, cried out to God, God, come on, you're going to heal my husband. So, I was crying out to God for that, and then not a flicker of life in him at all. So I went away and I got the nurses to come back, and I called Zoe, told her, could you bring my son home, my other son who lived in Thornbury? And, he was gone. And I was left with masses of questions and didn't quite know how to cope with those questions. I had no answer to any of them. And I couldn't hear God's voice at all in there. And I'm like, God, come on. What's going on? What's happening? And then a thought came to my mind, maybe God's not real. And I thought, And then I heard the voice of the enemy. Oh, Pete, so clearly. The enemy said to me, Nancy, God has turned his back on you. Turn your back on him. Wow. And I have to say, Pete, I considered it for a few minutes. Or not even minutes, moments. Until come into my mind was how I'd become a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and how at the age of 6 I had a supernatural encounter with God,
Mm-hmm.
and how throughout the whole of my life that's what I've seen God do. And I thought, no, I can't turn my back on God. I've got to trust him. So I stood by the bed after Ray's body was taken away from our own bed, and I stood by my bed and I said out loud to God, because I wanted the heavens to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I said, God, I have 101 different questions and I don't have an answer to any of them. But I want to say to you, Lord, that I'm not called to understand everything in life, but I am called to trust you, and trust you is what I'm going to do. And in bed that night, curled up, weeping, crying my eyes out, God gave me 2 gifts: a gift of the peace that passes all understanding, and also what I called a bubble of joy. I mean, I felt them come on me. And I'm like, I can't tell anyone I've got a bubble of joy. They'll think I'm
It
mad.
feels inappropriate, yeah.
Yes, 43 years I've been married to this man that I love dearly, and I've got joy, But of course, it says that in the scripture that God will give joy for mourning. And from that time, it's been hard, been difficult. I'm not denying that at all. But those 2 gifts have never left me.
Wow.
And God has just led me bit by bit on the way forward, without having the answers, without knowing all things, but trusting him. And trust is something that I think our nation needs to hear about these days.
Wow. Nancy, that's incredible. You are an absolute blessing. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being so honest and vulnerable there, Nancy. That's incredibly powerful. And the dynamic of being a person who truly believes in the miraculous and healing and breakthrough, and then faced with this contradiction with someone you deeply love, and then having that dilemma before God. Do you know, I think what you said is so powerful about the 101 questions you don't have the answers for, but you nevertheless, you're the Lord's, you're going to trust him, nevertheless. That's hugely important.
I don't think we've got time to tell the story, but basically, I shouldn't be here because 2022, something happened to me and I ended up in hospital. The doctors told me didn't tell me because I was unconscious, but I was going to die. My sons had to come immediately. They didn't know when I was going to die, but they discovered I had a traumatic brain injury with 2 brain bleeds, blood clot in a vein, and fractured skull. And God raised me up, brought me out of hospital. I remember the consultant came in and in this hospital, which was a rehab hospital for brain injuries. And he said, Nancy, you're going to be in here for at least 6 weeks because you're a seriously ill woman. And I was like, what? 6 weeks? Oh, no way. I've not been in here for 6 weeks. And I said that to him. And he said, well, unless you can prove me different, I'm telling you, he told me it 3 times. You are a very ill woman. You will not get out of here for at least 6 weeks. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking because I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. I couldn't get out of bed without help. I couldn't go to the toilet on my own. And yet, 2 weeks later, the same consultant came in and sat by my bed and said, Nancy, just got one question for you. And I'd never seen him since the day he told me I was a very ill woman. And he said, when do you want to go home? I said, now, I want to go home now, today. Oh, no, you can't go home today, he said. And I'm praying, inwardly praying, God, please get this man to change his mind. I want to go home today. God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but change this man's mind. All the time he's talking and he's saying, well, the reason why you can't go home is because when we send people home, they've got to have their medicines and we don't have enough medicine to send with you. And I'm busy thinking, that's very reasonable. God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but change this man's mind. At that moment, the nurse walks into my room with the nurse that deals with all the medicines. And he said, I was just telling Nancy, she can't go home today. She wants to, but she can't because we don't have the medicines. And she turned around and said, well, actually, Nancy's only on one medicine and I've got plenty of it. So she can go home today and walk back out.
Yay.
He said to me, this consultant said to me, Nancy, he said, you should ask for £500,000. And I go, what? He said, well, everything you seem to ask for, you get. And I said, well, it says in the Bible, ask and you'll receive.
That's right. Yeah. He quoted scripture.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah.
Wow.
It was an amazing story.
Now, Nancy, we're talking about prayer, but just as we come into close, we were together in January with Scottish leaders, nearly 300 Scottish leaders.
Goodness, that was amazing.
Calling on God for our nation. And Nancy, I'm so grateful you're going to be leading one of the hours in prayer this coming January as we call Scottish pastors and leaders together for 2 days of prayer and fasting for the nation. And I know that's very much your heartbeat to see a move of God, not just in the UK, but in Scotland as well.
Yes, exactly. I've got such a heart for my own nation and of Scotland. And it's a privilege to be able to do anything in Scotland. I'm coming to Scotland actually 4 times in the autumn. And then, of course, the last one with you guys in Cumbernauld, is it?
Cumbernauld, yeah.
Yeah.
In the heart of Scotland.
When I came up, I just felt God prompt me to come up and be part of that prayer time. And I did, and was knocked away by the eagerness and the unity of the people who came from all different parts of, Scotland, the north to the very south. But we're all there not because of friendship or getting together for a conference or whatever, but it was because they wanted to see revival in Scotland. Yeah. I was knocked away by that, and seeing them on their knees, crying out to God. It blew me apart. I was like, awesome, yes, God, I love this.
And God hears, and God is answering.
Yes, absolutely.
Nancy Goudie, what a blessing you are. Thank you so much for taking time to join me for this conversation. Really grateful for your life. Thank you for your tenacity, for your faith. Keep going.
Thank you.
More is coming. And thanks for blessing us on the Brian and Pete podcast with your story. God bless you, Nancy.
God bless Pete.
We hope that you enjoyed today's episode of the Brian and Pete podcast. If you found this episode helpful, share with a friend and be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Brian is the pastor of Rehope Church, a multi-site church that started in Glasgow. He is also the founder of Scotland Bible School, a 3-year Bible school where students study every book of the Bible. Pete is the pastor of City on a Hill, a multi-site church across Edinburgh and the Lothians. He also leads Go Global, a family of hundreds of churches spanning 17 countries. If you'd like to submit a question to Brian and Pete, please email brianandpetepodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to having you join us for next week's episode.